All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you. Let's give that last panel one more round of applause. Okay, so as was hinted at, my name is Alex Ambrose. I'm with New Jersey Policy Perspective and also a proud Rutgers alum. Today, myself and Kim Scarborough will be your moderators for this panel, Accelerating Climate Action Across New Jersey Transportation, Energy, and Building Sectors Within a Changing Federal Landscape. You can use the QR code for panel 2 to submit questions for this panel. First, I'd like to introduce you to our all-star panel of speakers. Please hold your applause until the end. I know it will be tempting. We have Dale Brick, who is Director of State and Regional Policies at Harvard Environmental and Energy Law Program. Zoe Baldwin, Vice President of State Programs and New Jersey Director at Regional Plan Association. Jennifer Senek, Senior Executive Director of the Center for Urban Policy Research at Blaustein School. Chris Oleth, Director of the Special Initiative on Offshore Wind. Mark Warner, Senior Vice President at Gable Associates. And Melissa Miles, Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. So for this panel, we really wanted to zero in on opportunities to move the needle on emissions reductions. So we're focusing on the sectors that contribute the most to greenhouse gas emissions in New Jersey: transportation, building, and energy generation. We've asked each of our panelists to think about those policy gaps and barriers and examples from other states, and to focus on things that can really make a difference in reducing emissions. We've asked each panelist to give 5 minutes of lightning remarks, and I do mean lightning remarks. And then we'll have a conversation and move to audience questions. So to kick us off, we're going to start with Dale Brick, who will talk about all 3 of these sectors. Dale, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for putting on this great show, Rutgers. It's very densely packed. I want to start by echoing some of the things that we've already heard this morning, like states is where it's at, and there is a lot of hope and great work to be done. It's feels very heavy. There's a lot of how are we going to survive here? But there is so much, especially what Kate was just saying, to get ready for when this isn't the case at the federal level anymore. And also, I think we can feel good about helping figure out how we're going to do the clean energy transition is also something we can do to help save democracy, because it's showing how government works, how government can make your lives better. Improving quality of life, of course, health and environment, but really having that day-to-day impact. And another thing I just want to say at the outset is we are not alone. There are a lot of states working on this, even in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana. We just came back, actually, Kate and I, from a meeting with your tireless public servants, Helene and Peg, working with our colleagues in all these other states who are figuring out how to move the needle, even in places that are much, much more challenging than New Jersey. And why is that? Because none of this is really about being a climate martyr. It really is about how can we do things better, faster. So just to touch on a few things in each sector, the power sector, Jesse went through everything pretty thoroughly. I just want to hone in on 2 areas where I see huge opportunity. One is right here in the state, figuring out how to site and permit things better. We have all the power to do that. And the other is PJM, our grid operator, which, I think some people are like, oh my God, what is that? And I don't want to go over there and deal with that. But that is a huge opportunity. And in other places in the country, states have a much larger role in governance and making the decisions about how we operate our grid, and the cost that we're paying in our energy bills and the delay in seeing the clean energy economy because of the interconnection queue at PJM. It's very daunting for any governor to come in and say, I'm going to tackle that because it's so complicated, but that's a huge opportunity. We really have to go there. On buildings, another huge opportunity. I totally agree with Jesse on the clean heat. Nobody has figured this out. We do have clean heat standards. building performance standards we're starting to see at the city and state level, but there's still the compliance element of that. How are we going to scale improving efficiency and transitioning to electric heat, that space and water heating and induction cooking, which is better than gas, if you haven't heard about it yet. So that nobody has figured that out, but there are some really innovative strategies percolating right next door in New York, because we have Local Law 97 in the city that is requiring buildings to do this, and they don't know how to do it. So people are starting to come up with some creative ideas to deliver super low-cost transition at a time when you're making decisions anyway, because you got to change your hot water heater or your boiler, using municipal bond markets and state revolving loan funds, and some creative things that we've already do on the water side that we don't even think about. This is how we finance like wastewater treatment plants. Then the other thing I'd like to highlight is one of the pieces of frozen money is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It's $27 billion. They're winning in the courts, but it's not unfrozen yet. But I'm going to remain optimistic that that money will flow. One of the big ideas coming out of the GGRF grantees is providing super low-cost financing to housing agencies. So with that low-cost money, you can actually cover the delta of building like all-electric new multifamily housing, even doing retrofits of existing housing to scale electrification. You could change an entire market with one great idea like that, and that's coming down the pike. And if we don't end up getting the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund money, we will find other ways to advance that kind of idea. On the transportation side, I'm almost done to my lightning round. You know, yes, we're transitioning to electric. Everybody's aware of electric vehicles now and the charging infrastructure that's coming along, but we still have some big challenge with, like, for example, medium and heavy duty trucks. Again, your tireless public servants have secured, I think it's $250 million, right, guys, for to start building out and figuring out how to build out the charging infrastructure for trucks so that we can get those dirty trucks out of our communities. Just think about what it would be like to go down the street and not have, you know, all of these diesel fumes in your mouth. It would be such a huge public health and quality of life improvement. So that's a big opportunity. And another Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund strategy is to subsidize the financing of fleets. And they're starting to do that. There's already been deals on this in California around ports, because ports have tons of diesel, and it's right always next to a low-income community. So those are the kinds of things that are starting to happen, and I think in the next administration in New Jersey have a huge opportunity to push those things forward.
Great, thank you, Dale. And next we're going to hear from Zoe Baldwin from Regional Plan Association. Zoe?
All right. Hello.
There you go.
Thank you, Alex. So I got to tell you, I sat down to think about what I was going to talk about today, and I really kept tripping over the phrase changing federal environment, because it really feels like an understatement at the moment right now, right? And every day for the last couple weeks, I've been waking up to this like awfully apt metaphor, watching Route 80 collapse on itself, and can't help but really think there's a lesson here about hollowing out infrastructure that is critical because it needs those supports, right? But then, past my cynicism, I've really been, thinking about this structurally a lot, and I think that there's a really strong argument that kind of hasn't been stated explicitly, kind of like eaten around the edges in this morning's conversation, but all of the sectors represented here today actually have been on an arc away from federalism and to a state control for probably more than a decade now. When it comes to offshore wind development, everywhere else in the world, that was a national priority done nationally. Here we have national lease areas, and states are left to their own devices to bid very complicated work. EV conversion, same thing. We have patchwork rollout across our states. New Jersey, I don't know if anyone has an EV, but I do, and driving on the Turnpike and Parkway, there is no infrastructure until you get down to the Atlantic City Expressway, whereas New York is an exemplar in this space and has done a really good job building that out comparatively, right? And so looking at this changing role of the federal government is actually identifying what it has actually been providing and what we're really losing here. And honestly, it's funding and incentives, funding and financing, two different things, and incentives. We're not getting like true international policy initiatives and implementation frameworks the way that we used to, right? So IIJA was kind of heralded as our generation's New Deal. Could not be structurally more different. We plussed up a bunch of our existing formula funds in transportation. So that meant if you had a good capital program because you had a great governor, awesome, you're doing great stuff. But if you had a bad one and filled with road widenings, you just accelerated just that because there wasn't policy tied to that funding. And then separately, discretionary money is very important. I don't want to downplay the role of grant funding, but it still, again, creates this uneven, less predictable results rollout of policies in different areas because it's all up to how well funded is your state, what technical assistance capability do they have, and so really we've kind of been in this moment. It's just greatly exacerbated right now, right? So thinking about it from that perspective can actually be a little bit more helpful because we do stand to lose money and we do stand to lose certain supports. But we've actually been doing this on our own for a very long time, policy-wise. And so I want to just flag something that I had lost how crazy it was. And so I started in my career like about just under 25 years ago, and I didn't realize what an outlier we're in. I'm going to go through this very quickly, and then I will end because I know there's a time clock here. But this infrastructure, transportation specifically, used to be pretty nonpartisan. We had a massive expansion period in our transit network, which is the most important way that we can decarbonize the transportation sector. So 1996 to 2011, built out multiple stages of the Hudson Bergen Light Rail. 1997, Midtown Direct gave one-seat ride. 2002, Montclair Boonton did the same thing. 2003, Secaucus Junction. 2004, created the River Line. 2006, Newark Light Rail. 2009, Meadowlands Line. That's massive, and I didn't know what an outlier it was when I was like, just doing that. And so I bring this up to highlight that all of that ground to a halt when we had Governor Christie come in, who did not prioritize any of this. We had a really supportive Obama administration for much of that time, and it still didn't affect our state progress. So what I want to say here is that, kind of as we're doing this, there's the housing and transportation. We know what we need to do. We need to densify. We need to expand service and frequency. We need to concentrate our density around downtowns, transit hubs, and anchor institutions. And we need to make it safer for bikes and pedestrians everywhere we go. But what we really need is champions. We need to be champions, and we need to build champions, and one can't happen without the other. So as we're being left to our own devices here in New Jersey in a more increasing way, I would just say that everyone here, advocates and practitioners, are the people that have to do that work. No one will express your rage for you. No one will tell your legislator that you need more housing. That's us. Only people they are hearing from are people that don't want housing, don't want to pay for transit. It's on us to do that. We need champions.
Great, thank you, Zoe. Yeah. All right, next we're going to hear from Dr. Jennifer Sinek from Blaustein. Jennifer, take it away. No, we cannot.
Now? Yes. Okay, great. That's my first test. I do have a slide as well. Thank you. So New Jersey's residential and commercial building sector, as we've already heard, is the second largest contributor to global warming in the state at nearly 25% of total net statewide emissions. This is largely due to space heating and cooling and hot water heating. Reducing these emissions in the building sector has important co-benefits beyond the energy and emissions reductions in terms of improvement in air quality, reduced cost, and job creation, as well as some job reskilling potential. Building decarbonization, I think it's important to note, particularly stands to benefit low-income communities in terms of health and safety improvements, cleaner heat sources, and providing cooling where none currently exist, particularly in conditions of climate change. New Jersey has made tremendous progress in the building stock. The newly released 2025 ACEEE scorecard, it came out just really a few weeks ago, showed that New Jersey had the biggest gain in utility-run energy efficiency in the country, so that's something really to celebrate. New Jersey has continued to adopt the newest building codes and appliance standards in a timely fashion, also a very big mover. Behind me is a slide that's really meant mostly for illustrative or maybe motivational purposes on some actions New Jersey could take and how they may reduce building sector emissions, right? The move the needle charge of this panel. These actions are modeled based on various external peer-reviewed studies and applied to New Jersey's building emissions portfolio by my team at the Center for Urban Policy Research. Some savings here are locked in from state legislation and associated policies. We've actually modeled this using the 2019 Energy Master Plan, as well as requirements of the Clean Energy Act and some subsequent executive orders. And others are more explorative and may unlock further decarb. One key takeaway here should be that we really need to address existing construction. There are significant opportunities through implementing a building performance standard, something I think was just mentioned briefly in an earlier talk, and expanding load flexibility programs. Here we're showing the potential emission savings just from load shedding, but wholeheartedly support robust load flexibility programs. In new construction, there's an additional opportunity to be realized by going further with codes, such as implementing a net zero energy stretch code and or requiring all electric new construction. In both new construction and existing buildings, there are opportunities to install, obviously, air source heat pumps, but also geothermal systems and thermal energy networks, which is something that we're looking at now under the legislation that was passed by Senator Smith. The result that's shown behind me, that modeled result, includes also building envelope upgrades. These strategies have been successfully implemented in other states, usually paired with the adoption of new standards such as clean heat or even clean peak, definitely innovative rate designs, and enabling legislation. Other states that we can look at and sort of borrow from include Massachusetts, which has implemented a municipal opt-in stretch net zero energy code. Washington has adopted a heat pump requirement in new construction. 14 jurisdictions currently have adopted a building performance standard, which limits either site energy use, greenhouse gas emissions of a building in some cases. California has enrolled customers in opt-in time of use rates to shift peak demand and to also curtail the duck curve. Massachusetts has identified areas with aging gas infrastructure and is piloting thermal energy networks. I think I'll probably stop there before moving into major barriers and give time for those questions later. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Senek. Next, we're going to move to Chris Oleth from the Special Initiative for Offshore Wind. Chris.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. You know, I woke up in a really bad mood this morning. I mean, frankly, you might be too if the essentially world you've built around your career for 25 years had been systematically attacked for the past 60 days by a federal administration that had a personal vendetta against you. So I'm here to talk about offshore wind. You know, I feel like I'm in a support group right now. It feels really good. But, you know, a quote that's been coming to my mind lately as I think about offshore wind, and even from our conversation so far this morning, is from Mark Twain saying, you know, my death has been greatly exaggerated. So I want to lead with the fact that offshore wind, significant challenges for sure. And, you know, while we have an outsourced and outsized challenge in developing our energy because all the projects are sited on federal property in the ocean. So that kind of challenges us in a unique way beyond solar or land-based wind when we look at clean energy options. You know, New Jersey has had specific challenges for sure, but what I want to do is just share a bit more of a regional and national context for where offshore wind is going and the region in which we sit and play. There are actually 5 offshore wind commercially scale projects under construction this season. Those projects range all the way from Massachusetts to Virginia and are going to continue to help embolden the supply chain that we've already started growing here in New Jersey. So I know we don't have a ton of time to go into a lot of details, but I do want to talk about some of the things that I really think that New Jersey can continue to do, being a leader in offshore wind as we have been. Certainly, I don't want to undermine or dismiss the challenges we've had. The real challenges started when COVID hit, and that's when interest rates really started rising. Offshore wind projects have a high capital cost, $2 to $3 billion a project. So even 1% interest rate change can dramatically change the project financing scheme. So when we saw interest rates rising by, 10 points or something, you can imagine really what it did to that size infrastructure project. Then there was a war that started in Ukraine. And it may seem like, oh, what would that have to do with offshore wind in New Jersey? But actually, it had a huge impact on the project developers and how they were focusing their energy in offshore wind. That geopolitical factor started focusing so much of the attention of the offshore wind industry to Europe, because Eastern Europe has a mandate to get off of Russian gas, and that is like an absolute national worldwide priority for Europe. So you can see there's this pull away to focus on Europe, start focusing on China that has a real, strong energy demand. So, that's when offshore wind really started facing its challenges. We saw the project, the flagship Ørsted Ocean Wind project drop out of New Jersey, which was, also known as like the Halloween Massacre. That was a really sad moment about 18 months ago for New Jersey's offshore wind. The current project that we have here, Atlantic Shores, is facing a lot of challenges as well, including really political attacks, specifically from Congressman Van Drew, who is, has Trump's ear and is doing everything they can to really make that project hugely challenged. As we, I really appreciated the comments earlier about being champions and finding champions, and, I know all of you in the room are. We have some really great opportunities at the state level, but one thing that I haven't heard that much about yet, and I want to highlight, especially looking out and seeing so many of you in the room who I know are doing this, is the academic institutions, the universities. You guys are standing strong, you're doing your things. Rutgers, Princeton, Stockton, I don't want to start listing all the great universities that have been engaged in the research and work of offshore wind, not to mention all the great work that DEP and BPU are doing to fund literally tens of millions of dollars in studying of the oceans. All these great things that we can do in this time intervening. Offshore wind will experience delays. It will experience challenges and a pause. However, in that pause, there's so much good work we can do, including the research, including the transmission and grid interconnection reform, including encouraging the state of New Jersey to move forward on pre-built infrastructure. There's a really great proposal in front of the state to move forward some hardening of the grid that would allow offshore wind to be delivered in a thoughtful, strategic, and economic way when it's ready. So just want to put a plug out there for all the great things that are happening at the university level with the research institutions. Encourage you to continue your great work, and thank you for putting me in a better mood today. I feel better already. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, who clearly knows her audience. All right, now we're going to go to Mark Warner from Gable Associates. Mark, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. I think this conversation is especially timely. As we all know, we're dealing with a very complex environment that's changing very rapidly. So this is exactly the right conversation to have. So in the spirit of just getting this conversation going, I'd like to touch on two things. I want to talk a little bit about the electric vehicle market in New Jersey, and then I want to look ahead a little bit about the conversation that we're in the midst of and how to approach that. So talking about EVs, as many of you may not know this, but New Jersey's been a leader in EV adoption nationally for the last 5 or 6 years. That makes sense because if you've heard several times, transportation is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in New Jersey and nationally. And the good news is that we have a really good solution for the transportation sector, which is zero-emission vehicles, especially electric vehicles. And the reason they're powerful is that this math has been done a lot of times, including by us, but when you compare an electric vehicle to an internal combustion engine, even after accounting for the emissions associated with electricity, it's about 80% cleaner. So this is a very effective solution with a technology that already exists. We don't have to invent the flux capacitor in order to electrify transportation. It's also one of the fastest opportunities for mitigation. The entire transportation fleet completely turns over every 10 to 15 years. So unlike power plants, which basically live forever, transportation is something that can see emissions reduction happen very quickly. So New Jersey was right to be a leader in this, and we've seen so much progress the last couple of years, primarily because of an EV law that was established in New Jersey. I want to call out Senator Bob Smith here, who provided leadership in getting that legislation passed. It was signed by Governor Murphy in 2020. It's landmark legislation. It's widely considered one of the most progressive EV market development legislations in the country, and it established formal goals and then helped create the policies and program that would let us get to those goals. It's been working. Over most of the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen double-digit growth in EV adoption. We currently have about 212,000 EVs on the road in New Jersey, most of that adoption happened just within the last couple of years, which is a testament to how fast it's been growing. The bad news is, although there continues to be a lot of demand, don't believe everything you read in the press, there is still a very strong demand for electric vehicles. The growth has really changed. Last year, the net increase in the EV population was only about 0.5%. By comparison, the year before it was 66%. So we are continuing to see very strong interest and growth in the EV market. It's not as bad as the headlines would imply, but the growth in that market has collapsed over the last year. There's multiple reasons for that. We understand why a lot of those changes have happened. So the challenge right now is how do we continue to sustain what really is one of the most effective strategies for emission reductions given the changes in the environment that we're working with. The good news is there's really no failure in the fundamentals. It's not like EVs all of a sudden stop being effective. These are changes in the decision-making environment that can be addressed. So let's continue to support New Jersey's strength in electric vehicles. They're one of our primary options. We have so much to build on. We just need to figure out how to sustain that momentum given the challenges that we currently face. Now let's talk about how we have this conversation moving forward. I go to a lot of forums like this, as many of you probably experience. There are a lot of people standing up right now and looking at our clean energy and decarbonization goals and saying it can't be done. It's not physically possible. It will destroy the reliability of our energy infrastructure. It's not affordable, and so on and so on and so on. What we need, I think, the best way to respond to that kind of criticism is to be able to point to people that have actually done it. Because we can have theoretical arguments all day long. Any study I've ever done always has assumptions that could be challenged, right? So the most powerful response to the criticisms that we currently have to deal with is to point to people that have actually done it. And there are good examples. Somebody was talking earlier about champions. We need to elevate the success stories and be able to show people exactly how it's done. So I'm honored to have been working with a group called Duke Farms. For those of you that have never been there, it's a wonderful destination in New Jersey. It's on 2,400 acres right by the Raritan River in Somerville. They're a center of the Doris Duke Foundation. And they committed over the last 10 years to very mission-driven work to massively decarbonize their entire operation. It's happening. They're doing all the things that we know we need to do. They've done the hard work around efficiency and conservation. We're now just turning up a solar system that will make them 100% solar powered with integrated storage. So they're running on solar during the day and at night. And they're in the process of electrifying both transportation and heating deeply. Those are all the things that we know we need to do. That list I just went through is basically, for the most part, the Energy Master Plan. So you can think about folks like Duke Farms as basically the Energy Master Plan made real. They're a poster child that shows that it can really be done and can help educate other people how to do it. And that gives us a way to combat all the folks that are saying it can't be done in an affordable way, it can't be done in a reliable way. That's just not true. And we need to make those points in as vibrant and cohesive a way as we can to respond to criticism that we currently are operating in. We are in the middle of, in essence, rethinking all of our decarbonization and clean energy goals. And, having those champions and proof points are especially critical. I'm reminded of a wonderful quote from Winston Churchill. He said, "You can count on Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option." So we're kind of in the midst of rethinking that conversation, and we have a lot to build on here in New Jersey. As challenging as it may seem for some of us that have been doing this work for a long time, it's actually much better here than in many other places. We just need to figure out how to sustain that momentum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now, last but certainly not least, we have Melissa Miles from New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. Melissa, take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the conveners for your invitation. What is clean energy? And I want you to think about this. And I guarantee that your definition is someone else's false solution. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that my job is not to pat us on the back. My job is to make sure that any energy transition is not done on the backs of the folks, the people in this country and in New Jersey who have historically borne the brunt of New Jersey's energy, transportation, and waste infrastructure. And unfortunately, my organization exists because even climate policy can do that. So there have been moments in the history of this state where when most of the environmental sector has been patting themselves on the back for great climate policy, it came at the expense of an overburdened community. So the places where I sit, and I sit at many tables as well, like most of my colleagues here, everything from the Governor's Council on Building Decarb to NESCOM to more recently the Natural Resources Restoration Committee, the New Jersey DEP's EJAC. My job is always to orient us to the fact that even our clean energy, our race to electrification, it has costs. It has externalized costs. And if we are not doing what I feel like are two critical things that so far I really haven't heard yet in today's discussion, which is fine, right? That's why we have different sectors. One is that we always need, and it's a beautiful thing, I see it happening much more often now than maybe 20 years ago. You know, I have the great privilege of working with some of the state's first environmental justice advocates. When they said things like EJ communities and emissions reductions, they were actually poo-pooed, they were pushed aside. When they said that perhaps carbon trading was not the way to go because it could potentially increase emissions in communities that held the oldest infrastructure. They were told it couldn't, that couldn't be part of things. And I understand that now, most policy being developed by the state intentionally includes voices from our state's historically overburdened communities. But that is fairly new, right? This is a great thing, but when I say that even climate policy can sacrifice communities, it means that I need folks to really take that seriously, right? In our race to electrification, are we thinking about displaced emissions? As we talk about electric vehicles, are we thinking about communities where this is so far from a reality? This conversation almost feels like an alternate reality to someone like me, which is, again, it's okay, right? There are rooms in which this, I may be echoing some of the things that I heard today. It might be me but not now, not today. Today, I'm here to remind us that we have a responsibility. And, part of that, I'm looking into the audience and I see representatives from some of our community-based partners like the South Ward Environmental Alliance. I see my staff. I see representatives from the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I sit on their Reparations Council. I am not blind to the impacts of race and economics on who gets clean energy. That is where I start. I am only in this work because I was not afforded the luxury, because of who I am. Because of who I am more likely to live experiencing the impacts of dirty air and polluting infrastructure. So that was my starting place. And so I can never forget that when I'm in these rooms, those are the communities I represent. And they are still far from, being included in conversations like this. And so the other thing that I'll say is that, sadly, our sector has not changed culture as quickly as we've changed policy. And we see now the dire consequences of that. You don't need facts to talk to everyday people. You can convince people with no facts at all, is what we're seeing happening in this current administration, right? Just speaking to people's basic needs and instincts. So I believe that people have basic needs and instinct towards, happiness, security, being able to, live their lives. But as long as we keep climate policy at a place where regular people have no say, and we only tell them afterwards the big-brained ideas we came up with, we will not win this fight. And because this is a fight of culture. We have to change hearts and minds. That's how you change people's behavior. That's how you actually get what you need to change policy. Because I know there are advocates in this room. We spend a lot of time talking to legislators who do not care until we show up with 100 people. So, I'm here to kind of put remind us that none of this happens without people on the ground, and especially without, really the masses of people who unfortunately still see us as a group of fringe folks who are trying to take away their stoves and trying to take away, their gas-guzzling cars. They don't trust us. And until we figure out the narrative and how to communicate this and bring along everyday people, I don't see how we're really going to have the transition we need. And I'm sorry to be the one who, but that's what I am called to say today. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to the entire panel for your incredibly thoughtful introduction remarks. We're going to transition now into a discussion, some moderated Q&A before we get into audience Q&A. And we're going to start with something kind of timely. And just feel free, pick up your mic and start answering when you're ready. As has been mentioned, the BPU recently released their updated energy master plan. While some of us may not have had all the time to absorb all of it yet, I'm interested to hear some of your initial reactions, or if you haven't gotten a chance yet, what are you looking forward to seeing in the energy master plan?
Can I ask a real question from the seat? Did they release an actual energy master plan, or is it just the slides I saw about a potential new energy master plan? I'm sorry to be facetious, but it's a real question.
That is a very good question, and I don't see Marjorie that is correct? All right, we had at least one expert confirm audience interaction right now. So far, not full energy master plan.
I'm sorry, that to me, I'll just step in here because that was frustrating to me. There's a million reasons why politically they may or may not have released what was already kind of in the works for quite a while and was having great work put in by BPU and the other departments, into this piece. But under no circumstances should New Jersey's goals change because we have a different president. New Jersey's goals should be New Jersey's goals because they are correct for our state and the trajectory that we know we need to be on. And I would just say that about that.
Thanks for that question. So, things may change drastically here depending on the governor we get. And that's another thing I haven't heard so much about. I really think we're going to need to protect the BPU depending on the governor we get. I've already heard candidates poo-poo the Energy Master Plan. They've made it partisan. But one thing that I would like to see really in the Energy Master Plan, I'm really excited about commenting on, is community energy planning, which is an idea that a colleague of mine, Dr. Nikki Sheets, and I spoke with the BPU about maybe 8 years ago. And then we're excited to see it sort of roll out in a form maybe about 4 years back. But in my opinion, community energy planning is really a resilience and sustainability tool in communities, where they kind of ground truth their reality of what kind of energy infrastructure they need to protect themselves in a climate emergency, whether it be, an electric school bus, whether it be a climate hub, whether it be solar, battery storage, but really starting with people's kind of lived reality, their energy burden, and then moving into, okay, where do you want to start? Is it with, clean houses? Is it your buildings? Is it heat pumps? Is it thermal energy networks? Is it, climate? But starting with the community and then, putting the pieces in place for different communities to be able to make those decisions for themselves.
Sure, I'll add something. One thing I did not see in the, I think, 62 pages of slides that were released as the Energy Master Plan were the presumed adoption curves for some of the technologies. I'm sure it underlies the model, but I think that's really important to see, to be able to gauge how realistic some of the assumptions are. And I agree with many of your comments. Behavior is incredibly important. And understanding the use cases, the varying use cases, and therefore knowing how to design programs that will have the rapid uptake we seek. Along those lines, just to sort of mention, the transactions costs are quite high for changing one building at a time, particularly when we're talking about the single-family residential building stock in New Jersey, much of which is old and lacking in some of the basic infrastructure that would easily allow, for example, air source heat pumps to be installed. It does occur to me that we probably should be talking about new models of property rights and governance, particularly when we start thinking about neighborhood scale infrastructure, in terms of who will design it, who will own it, how will it be paid for. So I think actually there's lots of opportunity there. But we do need to start having those discussions and being open to new models for how we really accomplish market transition or market transformation, which is what we're talking about with the time frame that's available to us.
Can I just key off this idea of the community energy planning? Because one thing we haven't talked about that much is the role of the BPU and the regulatory framework. And if we're going to be scaling electrification in buildings, we're going to be decreasing gas consumption, and what is the just and orderly planning of the gas distribution system, over this decarbonization period, so that we don't end up with unintended consequences, like a very small number of people left paying for the entire distribution system because wealthy people are electrifying. But one of the challenges on the gas planning side is we have, as almost all states have, an obligation to serve. It's part of the regulatory framework for utilities, but we don't really want to have an obligation to serve gas. We want to have an obligation to serve heat. But because of this sort of perverse regulatory framework, one person, one household could prevent neighborhood scale electrification when everybody else wants to do that, and it's much, much cheaper than, for example, having to build a new compressor station or build new gas infrastructure. So if you have community energy planning and the communities themselves are sort of self-selecting and saying, we want to be in the front of the line for electrification, then you can figure out ways to start overcoming those regulatory barriers it's almost like a pilot that you can see how it can work, but it's driven by what communities want instead of it's all sort of in some, rate cases at the BPU that are very difficult for anybody to participate in. Mark?
So we don't really have a plan. Perfect, thank you. Thank you. So we don't really have a new plan, but we have a plan to get a plan. So I think as we go through that process, in addition to all the details about what technologies and policies and incentives, we need to also be very clear and intentional about how we think about the problem. So I want to suggest two things that I think we should keep top of mind. One is externalities. We know that one of the biggest motivations in this rethink that we're going through is a very valid concern about affordability. But as we think about that, if all we're doing to measure affordability is looking at the number on the utility bill, that's a very distorted perspective that leads to, in my view, incorrect conclusions. We need to account for the externalities involved in the decisions that we're doing here. There's a structural challenge with all this clean energy work because in many cases, the entities that are making the investments are not the entity that actually realize the benefits economically. So there's a structural disconnect. Most people won't invest in things unless they get some return on that investment. But if I'm investing in a solar facility, I'm spending my money, and one of the primary benefits is that society at large has cleaner air. Right? So the person doing the investment and the folks that benefit are different people. That's the role of policy. And so when we're thinking about how we connect the dots through policy to make the economics work, we have to look at affordability in the context of the broader externalities. And we're not very good at that, to echo what Clinton was saying this morning. There's some things we're not good at, and this is one of them. So without proper consideration of the externalities, our decision-making process will lead us in the wrong direction. The other thing I think we need to keep top of mind is market stability and certainty and risk. Many of these programs are being done based on investments, and people that make investments hate uncertainty and risk. One of the things that's changed a lot the last couple of years, but especially the last 2 months, is the uncertainty has gone through the roof. If you want to talk about why things are expensive, there's a premium associated with higher risk investments. So as we re-examine our existing energy master plan, which by the way I thought was a pretty good one compared to the rest of the country, as we rethink that, we need to keep in mind that stability in the marketplace is as important as many of the other decisions that we do, because if people can't trust the policies, if they can't make investments and have confidence that over the return of investment period, those policies won't get pulled out from underneath them, people won't make those investments anymore. So we need to realize that market stability, low risk, and certainty have to be characteristics of our planning process.
Well, I'll just add and really appreciate recent legislation that, to name drop Senator Smith again, introduced that essentially links clean energy with data center siting in the state of New Jersey. We currently have an AI moonshot underway, in case you hadn't heard. So, I mean, if we're really going to be attracting this type of demand growth in our state, and I feel like doing it with clean energy is the only responsible way to do that. Parenthetically, I know how that would support the advancement of offshore wind. We're already seeing that in other states where, essentially, whether it's through, pursuing, higher targets for offshore wind based on new data centers locating in those states. So I think it's, a really important thing to do. And just the other day, you guys are all smart, so you can probably, I'm not a numbers person, but I was wondering if, is it worse to, do a ChatGPT than, drive my car now? Right? It is. Okay, I thought so. I got to turn that off. Okay.
Chris asking the real questions.
Hey, Alex, I just want to add something real quick talking about the AIs. I mean, this has been a huge development lately. We've done this math. You can, if the current trends continue, we're going to reach a point where we're feeding more electricity to the AIs than we are to the humans. So when you want to think about the magnitude of the transformative change that we're going through, and now add to that, We know electric vehicles, once we fully electrify, is going to add about 30% to the electricity demand. Heat pumps, even more so. Meanwhile, we have storage technologies that fundamentally scramble what the load profile looks like. We have interconnection problems on the renewable side. So there's a lot of challenges here around how quickly the energy infrastructure needs to change, and that's a decision-making challenge of its own.
Sorry, Alex. So there's another thing, again, just for us to grapple with, which is, again, the definition of clean energy. Does the state have a clean energy definition that any of you know of? There's no actual definition yet. So I want us to pay attention to this as we develop policy. What is clean energy? I'm coming back to that. Because depending on who you talk to, nuclear doesn't count, right? Nuclear is our way of using the energy and giving the waste to future generations. For EJ folks, it's a non-starter. And that's not to say we don't want to cook food and do things, but it's not something that we advocate for. Also, hydrogen, for the most part, across the country, you know, particularly because we have such strong ties with folks in Louisiana who are really on the front lines, the very front lines. You do not want to live next to these facilities. They are industrial. Where will they be sited? So hydrogen is also another form of energy that we are very wary of, no matter what color it is. And the colors just mask what the emissions are. It's all very water intensive. And then even things like wind, you know, we were hearing from our indigenous partners about how, you know, some of those things were impacting, you know, their worldview, and were they consulted? Like, so all I'm saying is when we are talking about clean energy, the materials are sourced somewhere. It's still not a fully just transition. It's a step, right? So I don't want us to forget that there's still inequity built in even to, you know, our calls for clean energy. And even as we take these steps, is the energy truly clean? You know, does it have potential to displace emissions onto other communities? Is it creating co-pollutants? Yes, maybe it decreases your greenhouse gases, but is it increasing NOx? Is it increasing some of those immediately deadly pollutants that we see coming from facilities? So again, bringing us back to what is clean energy, and, you know, making us all responsible for clean energy really being clean.
Thank you, yes. So now we're going to have one more question before we transition into audience Q&A. Remember, you can use the QR code for panel 2 to enter some questions in. And we're going to do one more lightning round. Is there one barrier or policy you have not mentioned yet that could be modified or changed to really accelerate greenhouse gas emission reductions in any of the sectors that we've talked about?
I don't have enough energy. I would have 3 answers: storage, storage, and storage. I've been working in clean energy for over 25 years. I've worked with all of the technologies, and we're doing a lot of work with storage right now. Storage is massively transformative. It changes everything, and it has the potential to make energy, especially electricity, much less expensive, not even dealing with the clean aspects and so on. So storage it enables high levels of decarbonization, and it also enables lower cost. So we don't have many strategies that check those boxes. And unfortunately, New Jersey is relatively behind on its storage policies and incentive programs. So in my view, that's one area where we could be doing a lot more on an extremely advantageous technology that's not getting enough attention, in my view, yet.
Mention one other thing that hasn't come up yet, which is capturing waste heat, and it's part of how we think about economic development. And this was another climate pollution reduction grant program winner, so the money's already out the door, although it was briefly frozen, that from New Haven. And basically they were trying to figure out how can they electrify new affordable housing, and they realized that the train station also needed to be renovated around the same time. And so in the planning for the economic development, they figured out that they could capture the waste heat from the train station HVAC system, and that would, if you use the waste heat in the affordable housing unit, you lower the cost such that the whole project for both are lower cost, and then now electrification pencils out where it didn't before. So it's not like these things don't have costs, but if we just take a step back and think, how can we do things in a smarter way, and even require, just as a matter of process, hey, you're doing economic development, you're getting state money to support economic development, just take a minute and look for the waste heat. Is there housing nearby? How can we put these things together? And you only go forward if it actually reduces costs. There's tons of opportunities like that and examples across the country that we can learn from that are just doing things in a smarter way, but it's not the way that we always do business, and so therefore, it's more challenging.
I'll build off of that, and I really want to echo what Melissa's been saying emphatically, because what I want to say right now is I didn't go into specifics for transportation and housing policy because we don't have a shortage of ideas. We all know what to need to do. But all of the advocacy has historically been directed at what we air quotes call policy. But I want to be super clear that what matters is actually the implementation and how we are implementing it. You can use the word equity all you want, but without changing the structures and the processes that yield that result, that word means nothing. And we need to be intellectually honest with ourselves about some of these barriers. The long-term energy is a bear. I worked in the US Senate for Senator Frank Lautenberg, and I handled his infrastructure portfolio. Energy was my least favorite part because it is almost impossible. You can talk about nuclear, then you get a little ghost popping up about dry cask storage, right? And it's like this at every turn, and the only way that we do it is to change the processes by which we are making these decisions. And I have personally watched that not happen. I watched Dr. Nikki Sheets stand up in a meeting, say his piece about his community and his concerns about RGGI, and then immediately was deflected, and they switched back to what we're gonna do with the RGGI money. And so I just wanna, I've been like kind of off message, my apologies there, but I really wanna make sure that we're thinking about how we're thinking about this, because the only thing that matters are what are the component parts that need to move in what order to yield our result. None of the other words matter. Structure and process, that's it. And so I just wanna echo what they were saying.
Testing. I want to sort of echo earlier comments, including my own, in terms of pursuing a clean heat and also a clean peak standard with associated enabling rate structures. Also, legislatively, it would be helpful to clarify or make possible the development of a building performance standard, as well as a net zero energy stretch code. It seems there's discussion about whether the current uniform construction code allows for these things or not in New Jersey, so clarifying through legislation would certainly help reduce a barrier so that the policy discussions and modeling discussions that are taking place would know that there's actually a realistic path to implementation.
I'll just say on offshore wind development, one thing that I don't think has been raised yet is this opportunity for regional collaboration, not only for the opportunity to, kind of create larger infrastructure base and perhaps spread, some of the risk of developers, but also, to work, I think, just in the way that states need to work together to activate politically in, these really precarious times. There are states who have worked together to have joint solicitations to purchase power for offshore wind, who have worked together on joint transmission projects. When you have projects built out in the middle of the ocean, they don't really belong to any one state, right? So how can we work with either regionally adjacent states or other states who have, similar goals and concepts so that we can help New Jersey win too?
Go ahead, Melissa.
No problem. So, yeah, I just want to say on the collaboration, I think working together, cross-sector collaborations, you know, the folks on this panel, absolutely brilliant. I can think of a way that I could work with each, you know, we could work with each one. So collaboration, I recently got this book by Dr. Ayanna Johnson called What If We Get It Right? I highly recommend this book. It is a counter-narrative to the doom and gloom of like Waterworld and Mad Max. I watch a little bit too much dystopian future. And also what it highlights is the kind of creativity that people actually possess, like how much we will need to think outside of current boxes, which just leads me to my last point, which is young voices. Many of you in this room are professors. Like, let's help young people to stretch beyond. You know, we all come from a different paradigm. We know there has to be sheerly nothing short of a paradigm shift. And so it may not be us. You know, we need to set the stage for the next generation to do maybe what we couldn't. So let's really let them dream, and in that regard, follow their lead.
Wow, what a great point at one of the hubs of young voices here in New Jersey. All right, I think we have time for one or two questions from Kim Scarborough, who's been aggregating our audience questions. So Kim?
So first question, what are the ways that this group can focus on effectively reaching the public and gaining their support for electrification and decarbonization?
Everyone on the panel just took a deep breath. Who would like to take that one?
So I'm not going to say we've been amazing at that, but we're definitely focusing more on our communications. So one thing I've learned recently through some studies from Media Matters is that the other side, they are killing us. When it comes, most Americans apparently are spending 6 hours watching video content. We know our school systems are being dismantled. That is where, you know, people are getting their information from, is social media. We are not there. And again, this is why, you know, we really need these intergenerational spaces, because on the narrative, the sheer narrative, we're losing. So that's one way that I'm hoping, you know, we'll be able to kind of lead the way and show others, like, we really need to get our voices out there.
One thing. Yep, no. Mine might be dead. It has a big delay. One thing that to me has been time we've been spending in focus groups with low and moderate income tenants in affordable housing. This is for a project where we're investigating barriers and opportunities to electrify LMI, low and moderate income multifamily in New Jersey. And it's been really super interesting to hear the perspectives of people who either already living in electrified housing. Kind of newsflash, we're actually finding that it's a market trend that new, affordable, tax credit-driven multifamily housing is already electric as a result of those programs. And people who are not living in electrified housing and sort of what their perspectives are. This has been very, very insightful, as well as interviewing builders and funders and people that are basically along the supply chain of producing affordable multifamily housing. It takes time, but I think these community conversations are incredibly informative. And in these cases, I don't know if social media strategies would be a complement or not, but these are just actually like sit around the table, have discussions, and hopefully enough of them that if it's not exactly a representative sample, there's at least a good bit of information there. So it might be that time intensive, but I think it's probably the only way to get this right.
That's a really great question, and we could spend the entire rest of the day just on that. But let me just offer two thoughts. One, this rethink that we've been talking about is happening in a heightened environment of not only misinformation, but disinformation. There's a massive amount of disinformation out there, and we're not doing well at how we operate in that kind of changed environment. The other thing that I think is really important is when you talk about these technologies and climate change and so on, we talk about it in a way that doesn't connect with most people. If you just go and say climate change is, well, the temperature is going to go up by a couple of degrees, most people go, all right, so it's a couple of degrees warmer in the summer, so what? That's not the way to get people's attention. We have to help them understand that climate change really means food scarcity, lack of access to fresh water, extreme weather events with greater frequency and impact, and on and on and on. The favorite I like to use is that wine and chocolate are going to get a lot more expensive. So, as well as coffee. So if we take away the nation's coffee, wine, and chocolate, we will have their attention. But we don't talk to people that way. And I'm not making that up, by the way. If you look at what's happening in those three industries, that's a very real statement. But we need to talk, especially to crazy Uncle Joe that comes in Thanksgiving. We need to be able to talk about climate change in a way that makes sense for the people that are experiencing it. That, to me, is a lot of what's missing.
Well, and I'll just, oh, do I have the broken one now?
It's your turn to be broken.
Oh, can I have that one? Okay, sorry. Yes, well, and I'll just kind of give an example of the dis and misinformation we experienced specifically in offshore wind. I mean, it's a case study. That's literally now a case study being written about all over the world about, essentially a very effective sentence, which is completely bogus, by the way, which is offshore wind kills whales. One sentence took public support of offshore wind in New Jersey from 80% to 50%. Our response in the offshore wind sector was a 5-paragraph response with 17 citations. Can't do that. I don't know what we do, but we can't do that. These really complicated, responses that require a PhD to understand them, that's how we responded to one very effective sentence, and we lost that war.
Can I just, another sentence like that? It's very easy to say job-killing energy tax, and then it's a 10-point plan about, what this is really about. But I do think listening to people, which is not what a lot of policy wonks do, is it helps you focus on the benefits. What is it that people want, and what are you doing that is actually delivering people things they want, like air conditioning in every house as it's going to get hotter and hotter. So we can talk about decarbonizing buildings, or we can talk about how do we get air conditioning in every single house? How do we get combusting fossil fuels out of your children's face? How do we get the diesel fumes out of your children's face? These are things that people want that we can deliver. And, without sugarcoating the cost, yes, then you can get into the 10-point plan about how do you do it in a smart way. But if we're having a conversation, I'm so in agreement of we do not, winning the hearts and minds, we really should spend the rest of the time thinking about this, because if we can't do that, we can't win.
What a great note to end on. Let's give a round of applause to our panel.